Greetings. Glad that you can be with me today. I'm Steve Cole, the pastor of the First Methodist Church in Oswego, Kansas, as well as the West Mineral Church in West Mineral, Kansas. Today we're looking at a sermon uh, that was done, uh, a letter from Peter to the people that have been kind of dispersed in various different places a few years after the resurrection. And we'll be looking at that. First Peter chapter 1, verse 13 to 21. Prepare your minds for action, discipline yourselves, set all your hope on the grace that Jesus Christ will bring you when he is revealed. Like obedient children, do not be conformed to the desires that you formerly had in ignorance. Instead, as he has called you, as he who called you is holy, be holy yourselves in all your conduct. For it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy. If you invoke as Father, the one who judges impartially, according to each person's work, live in fear during the time of your exile. You know that you were ransomed from the futile conduct inherited from your ancestors, not with the perishable things like silver or gold, but with precious blood of Christ, like that of a lamb without blemish. He was destined before the foundation of the world, but was revealed at the end of the ages for your sake. Through him you have come to trust in God, who raised him from the dead and gave him glory, so that your trust and hope are in God. May God add a blessing to the reading, the hearing, and the understanding of his word. Now, when we read that, it might kind of be hard to totally understand everything that is there. Yeah, takes a little while to kind of look at it and get the grasp of it. But we'll try to see what we can do about that. No doubt you've seen the Christmas movie, A Christmas Story, about the little boy that wants a Red Ryder BB gun for Christmas. And of course, he keeps being told, you'll shoot your eye out, kid. Well, in that movie is based on a book, actually, a story in a book, really. And it's titled, In God We Trust, All Others Pay Cash. You see it at the opening credits in the movie. But in God we trust, all others pay cash. And once in a while we'll see it maybe at a restaurant or sometime a store or someplace like that. They'll have those words. In God we trust. We put that on our money, don't we? Well, we didn't. Somebody did once upon a time. And it's there. And there are rumors that, well, there's people out there that want to try to take it off our money. How dare we say something about God and put it in a government entity like that? But it's gone. It has been taken to court a couple times and been found that just those words aren't promoting a specific religion. And so for that reason, it can stay. And it continues to stay there. That in God we trust. Why would we put in God we trust on our money? Well, because some people put their faith in their riches, in their money, their goods, or whatever they have. And it's trying to say that even though we're using the money, that God is the one we put our trust in. And that's what the passage that I read earlier, at the very end of the passage, it says, through him you have come to trust God, who raised him from the dead and gave him glory, so that your trust and hope are in God. Now, Jesus said in Matthew 6:19 to 21, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust consume, and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust consume, where neither thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, your heart will be also. How do we do that? How do we store up for ourselves treasures in heaven? Well, by trusting in God instead of those goods that we have, and by living a life that demonstrates that we trust in God. And I think that's kind of what Peter was talking about. Like I say, that passage is a little, could be a little confusing unless you really look at it and study it a little bit. But in it, he says, "He who called you is holy. Be holy yourselves in all your conduct, for it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy." Wow, being holy. That's something we don't hear a whole lot about these days. In fact, sometimes it's a negative thing for somebody to be thought of as holy. You think somebody be holier than thou, or that somebody that's holy is self-righteous and judgmental, not accepting. And we kind of think of somebody that's a holy person acts a certain way. They only read uh, Christian books, Christian devotional books, and they listen to Christian radio and watch Christian TV channels. And they only watch movies that are G rated. We wouldn't dare watch anything PG or, for heaven's sakes, R. Um, and they do good things and volunteer for good causes, and they don't cuss or swear. They don't drink, smoke, or chew, or go around with girls that do. And yeah, they don't do any of those terrible things, right? They're good people, but maybe they're too good. There was a town where we lived at one time that there was a girls basketball coach at the high school, and the only complaint people had about her was she was too religious. She's fine as a girls basketball coach, but she's too religious. Is it possible to be too religious? Maybe. Maybe, depending on how you look at that, look at things. Back when the Methodist Church started, and of course it was not Methodist Church, but the Methodist movement, we might say, part of the Episcopal Church or the Church of England, whichever you want to call it. And John Wesley started this whole idea, and part of it was holiness of heart and life, that he thought the people needed to be a little bit more holy in their living and how they acted and what they did. And he came up with what was called 3 simple rules. Don't hear much about that today, this whole idea of being holy. Because they felt that the Methodist Church had gotten away from this, and so he was trying to get people to do this a little bit more. Of course, eventually the Methodists broke off from and started their own denomination, but still, that happened. And we've had some other churches that have broken off from the Methodist Church too, and part of that was because of this whole idea of we didn't emphasize holiness enough. And so they decided that they needed to start a new group that emphasized that more. But John Wesley came up with what he called 3 simple rules for Methodists, right? And those 3 rules were do no harm, do good, and stay in love with God, or observe the ordinances of God, however you want to put it. And these 3 things were the demonstrations for living a holy life. Not brain science or rocket surgery. It's pretty easy to understand. To do no harm, do good, and stay in love with God. Those are the 3 rules. First one, do no harm. And basically means, do anything that would be harmful to yourself or to others. Do no harm, possibly even to, we might say, the world that we live in. That we do no harm, that you do things that are helpful instead of hurtful for others. We used to have an old saying when I was growing up in school: sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Well, it's not true. Words do hurt. And that we do need to watch what we say and do those things. that does do harm by the things that we say if we don't say the right thing. And we have people that do things that are legal, but are they ethical? And I'm kind of thinking, an example would be like payday loan places that charge outrageous amounts of interest to people, and usually low income people that only need to borrow a few $100s, and yet they'll charge them 16, 17, 18, 20% interest on those loans, and they have a hard time paying it back. That might be one example. It actually does more harm to the person than doing them good. Or we might say some people that are what we call slumlords, that have inadequate housing that they charge people rent for, and they won't maintain the homes that they live in and expect them to pay the full rent, even though they don't keep up on things that need to be taken care of. Legal? Yes. Maybe not ethical. And in some ways, that might be actually even harmful to somebody. Oh, the next rule was to do good. Pretty simple, easy to understand. And it's been attributed to John Wesley, although some people disagree about whether he actually said this, but I'm not going to worry about that. But it's attributed to John Wesley as saying, do all the good you can by all the means you can, and all the ways you can, and all the places you can, and all the times you can, to all the people you can, as long as ever you can. To do good, to show others that love. Now, we have to, and we can all know what those things are, to do what is right, to do what is good, to help others. And yeah, and we have to understand that following the three simple rules of these two being do no harm, do good, are not what saves us. They're not what gives us our salvation. We don't get our salvation because we've done good things or we haven't harmed people. We're told in Ephesians 2:8-9, for by grace you've been saved through faith, and this not of your own doing, is a gift of God, not the result of works, that no one may boast. Of course, it's not the result of works. But the very next verse after that says, for we are what he has made us, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand so that we may walk in them. Well, as Jesus said, build up for yourselves treasures in heaven, right? And that's how we do that, by not doing harm and by doing good. And lots of different groups, organizations, or people, even for that matter, do follow those two basic things. Just about any social service organization will do those things. The Lions Club, the Rotary Club, the Kiwanis, others, they do those things. They don't do harm. They do good. They do good things. And that's just the first two of the rules to follow. But the third one, stay in love with God. And what does that mean? To stay in love with God. Well, one thing, to observe the sacraments of baptism and communion, that we observe those things to show our love to God, but also by church attendance, by praying, studying the Bible, doing things like that, showing our love for God, staying in communion with God in our relationship with him, and also by loving others as well, doing things for others. And you think, well, wait a minute, so talking about loving God. Well, when we love others, didn't Jesus say, inasmuch as you have done this to the least of these, you have done it to me? So by doing things for others, we're in turn showing love for God by doing that. Well, the challenge for us is doing that following these three simple rules, or the idea of being holy, but doing it without being, as we talked about that one woman that they thought was too religious. You know, how do we, what's the fine line between being, and we might stop and think, sometimes we think of people as being self-righteous, unaccepting, judgmental. If other people don't do things exactly the way I think they should do them, they're wrong. Yeah, that's hard to do. And how far, so we have to know where the law, how to do this without being too judgmental in what we do toward other people. Here in the United Methodist Church, and I kind of think of the word United Methodist Church as an oxymoron. We're not all that united these days, it seems like. But we have a broad range of people within the United Methodist Church of the theological spectrum from the far left to the far right. Maybe not too far right, but still. We have a lot of people. And we used to use the terms liberal versus conservative, and now we use the terms progressive versus traditionalist. Potato, potato. But still. And we're in all these different, and then, but see, we have some that are one direction, some that are more the other. And then we have another group that we call the centrists. They're kind of in the middle. They're not to the far left, they're not to the far right, they're somewhere in the middle. And that, I think, is kind of where we're at. That's the part where holiness kind of is in that middle ground somewhere where we're not too far one or the other, but we're kind of there, and that's the challenge. How do we balance that out, so to speak, of being that way? Right now, the United Methodist Church is in kind of we wouldn't call it a split necessarily, because you usually think of a split as going right down the middle. It's not exactly in the even type thing. But we do have several churches that are leaving the denomination for various different reasons. But mainly it's those that are of the more traditionalist or more conservative end of things are the ones that seem to be leaving. And in our conference, losing about 10% of our churches. Other parts of the country it's more, other parts it's less. But that's kind of where we're at. And in that, when they go, the ones you have left are the centrists and the progressives. But I'd say probably a lot of us are that centrist group. Those are kind of in the middle that still want to hold on to a lot of our traditional values, we might say. But we're not so extreme that we want to leave. And so we're here. And I'd say that's kind of where I would be at. Is still, from a theological standpoint, probably still a traditionalist. And from our worship services, that where I'm at anyway, more of the traditional type of music and sermons and style of worship that we do is more of a traditional nature, but some of that has a tendency to be changing somewhat, and we'll see what happens. But we are to do as we said, to live that way in which we observe those three simple rules of doing no harm, doing good, and staying in love with God. There's some things they're called freshwater mussels that are in lakes, rivers, even some of our ponds. They kind of look like clams somewhat that live in these areas. Um, well, some of them are considered endangered species. They're possibility that in a few years there might not be any of them left. And the thing is are there very many people that really care? And where am I going with all that? What does that have to do with the price in China? But anyway, the idea is that they're an endangered species that few people really are paying a whole lot of attention to or care about. And I kind of think about that as some of us that are in the church, especially small rural churches, feel kind of like we are endangered species that very few people really care about. That we're still doing the things that we've always done. And kind of that way too, in those of us as far as we want to say the holiness idea of living a life of holiness. We might think of that we are those people that are an endangered species that nobody really seems to care, or a few people. That be as it may. God cares. God cares about us. And we will continue to be who we are and to see what happens, knowing that God loves us and cares for us, and that we are called to live this holy life for God. Well, thank you for coming, and know that God goes with us to guide us, lead us, and help us today and every day.